Welcome to the TFG Aftershow, where our goal each and every week is to take you deeper into the things that we do at the Financial Guys offices, but also take you into the lives of the key people and some prominent people, not only in our area, but in the country. As always, if you need us throughout the week, folks, please call us at 833-FIN-GUYS. I'm Mike Hayflick, along with my partner, Mike Sparazza. Happy to be here again. We're really thrilled to have this opportunity today, folks, to speak to Florida Sheriff of Pasco County, and amongst many contributions he's made, was a first responder on 9/11. Sheriff Chris Nocco, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
It's a tremendous honor, sir, to have you here. We were honored to have one of your colleagues, Sheriff Mark Daniels, on. And, what great insight at a very, very critical time, I think, in our country's history, to be honest. The things going on, in my opinion, are going to be decade-changing, maybe century-changing. And I don't think people really understand it, because if you're just watching the typical mainstream media, I don't think people see the actual, devastating impacts that this is causing. But really appreciate you being here. Let me start here. Before we get on to the crisis at the border, Sheriff, Mike and I are in New York State. We've seen devastating outcomes due to COVID. I mean, we could start with just business closures, school shutdowns. What have you observed as the consequences of COVID in your county, Pasco County, but even in Florida, just generally speaking?
Right. And that's one thing I know for you New Yorkers. I'm a native Philadelphian, but God bless. I thank God I'm in Florida. I will say that, and I still have family up in Philadelphia, and so I'm constant daily interactions with them. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, thank God what we're dealing with in Florida. Our leadership has been fantastic. Our Governor Ron DeSantis has done a tremendous job, and I will tell you that he's shown more and more that his backbone is very firm, because the decisions he's making, when they're being made, second, third guessing, there's people that are coming after him, attacking him. But as things keep play out, you realize he was making the right decisions. And so, I give him kudos to him and his team. There's a couple things. One is about the schools. Florida was one of the first ones they were going to keep the schools open. They had high school sports, youth sports. That was critical, because, that is a big impact. And as I go through this, I'll talk about the mental health aspect, because that's something that we're dealing with, the physical aspects of COVID. It's a horrendous disease. It's horrible. People are dying. But the mental health aspects of it are going to live with us much longer. And so as you deal with the physical aspects, you got to keep in mind the mental health aspects. And, those kids, they trained their entire lives for their senior year of high school. And I can imagine states that they weren't given the opportunity to play sports because this was their opportunity. It could have been music. It could have been theater. This was their moment to shine, to get that scholarship, because that's the only way someone can get out of where they're from. And they lost it because, of bad decisions. You could see it with, businesses. Even within our county and within our state, there were times that we had to limit, the amount of people in the stores. They had to, cut it out. But us as a sheriff's office, we reached out through social media. Our communities rallied together because we knew we had to keep those small businesses open. And as soon as the governor was able to lift those, make it more people into businesses, they were able to do that. And it's ironic that people come up to a law enforcement official and thank us for supporting them. These are things that, there is the mental health aspects of it, the monetary, people keeping their families together. These were huge. And that's the sad part that you're seeing across the country, is that even when people are now understanding that there's a mental health component, I can tell you, it's our behavioral health calls. We have a unit, behavioral health intervention team. Our units were going off the chart, the amount of calls for service. We are seeing suicides, domestic violence calls were going up. These are things that, in these other states, I know we're dealing with COVID deaths, but at the same time, there's so many other deaths that are going on that aren't being talked about. This is the epidemic that's going to live with us, as you talked about. It's not just going to be a couple of years. It could be a decade, that the mental health aspects, it could be a generation with these kids that are, isolated from their friends for 1 to almost 2 years. These are aspects of mental health that are going to live with us for a very long time.
And I know you just said it, you guys were doing everything you could to keep businesses open and to help them make decisions or help them with any regulations they needed. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with New York, but we're the opposite. Up here, not so much law enforcement, but our government officials were doing everything they could to shut us down.
Yeah, we have governor envy of Governor DeSantis, okay? I'll publicly say it. I have governor envy. I'd love for him to be our governor. It's almost the polar opposite up here in New York.
And the other thing I was going to mention, too, was, you talk about second guessing and triple guessing and quadruple guessing. Your governor. Our governor's got 2 or 3 different scandals going on, and it seems like nobody's second guessing him up here.
Right.
He's not even getting a second guessing, and there's probably lives that were on his hands from that nursing home scandal.
No question about that. Right. Yeah, we truly do respect what you are doing down there. You and the rest of the leadership. There's just no question it has worked. That's the thing about it. Every day we wake up with new ideas about how devastating the next variant of COVID's going to be. And oh no, hang on to your hats, folks. We're going to have to close down again. We're going to have to shut down again. They're still talking about not getting back to school until maybe like September of 2022 in some of these school districts. It's absolutely outrageous. And it's like, if you're not tuned into this, I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe what they think they can do without creating devastating outcomes. So I'm with you. I agree wholeheartedly. Mike, you're a high school football coach, so you know the significance of getting kids back to school, getting them with their peers. They don't want to be around parents. I know that. My kids are 19 and 22 now. They don't need me, first of all, but they don't want to be around you when they're in their teens. They want their friends. They need their friends. And it's been devastating for those kids.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
Really.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say that there's so many elements, and maybe Florida is in a unique position also because besides our great leadership, and that's what I say, we are very blessed. The fact that, we go through natural disasters on a frequent basis, with the hurricane seasons coming through. And I know I've lived through it, I grew up in it. You get snowstorms, it's hunker down and stay inside.
Mm-hmm.
In hurricanes, you hunker down, stay inside very quickly, and then you get outside and you clean up and you repair and you move on. And that's probably the mentality of what Florida we're going through right now is, hey, when there's times we hunker down, but we get up real quick, we move the debris, we get moving forward, because that's what we do in Florida. And those are where, even like, and I'll give you an example, like the university system. I talked to one of our college presidents, and, he was talking about how it's, I said online learning is hard. And he goes, no, it absolutely is. And we're realizing with science and math classes, nobody wants to take it online. So there's going to be long-term effects there. But, when your state of New York is looking at dollars and cents going forward, a lot of your universities, the SUNY system has probably been shut down. Well, how much money have they saved on energy, cooling and heating during that time? Where's all that money going and the resources? Because those are those type of things in Florida people were talking about, saying, hey, if the university is shut down, what's going to happen to all that money that they're saving from keeping those doors closed? But I will give our credit to our university system. They got up and running very quickly because, like the rest of the state, we're not going to sit inside. We're going to get outside and we're going to get moving.
Well, and we said on our podcast yesterday, too, you just said online learning. That's hard enough. I mean, adults working from home is hard enough. College kids doing online learning is hard enough. Now you put the 5 to 8 to 10-year-old that can barely focus anyways, right? When he's in school or she's in school, then you try and put them in online learning. Right. It's not a great way to teach kids and to get kids to progress in their learning curves, right?
Right. Well, the other part too is we already have a generational issue where kids are consistently putting their heads down, looking at their phone. They talk to each other. They could be sitting at a table next to each other, texting each other.
Yeah.
Now we've put them in COVID. They're not. Now they're texting. Now they're outside. At least in the classroom, they were forced to raise their hand, talk, speak, have conversations. Now we're putting them in an environment where they sit at a desk and they come out with ways of how can I get off the Zoom as quick as possible?
Exactly.
How can I fake myself looking at the camera? So I don't have to be here. I mean, We're creating more distance, and this is going back to the fabric of our nation where we're falling apart. Is instead of talking together, creating the best idea wins out. It is more, I'm going to send a Twitter message to each other. I'm going to try to destroy you on social media. I don't even know who you are, but I just want to pick a fight with you no matter what. And instead of having conversations, the best idea wins. It's more who's popular and who can be more insulting to each other.
Yeah. Yep. In Florida, you just said, you guys have crises, you recover, you move on. In New York, it's more of a don't let a good crisis go to waste by asking for more federal funds, by asking for those who contribute tax dollars we need more tax dollars to put in some general fund where we end up not even knowing where the darn money is spent. So far different approach here in New York, unfortunately.
That's right. Your businesses can move down to Florida. We got plenty of space. We're looking forward to them moving down.
Many are. Sheriff, let's go on to the idea of illegal immigrants now. What have you heard about the transport of illegal immigrants coming over the border, but then being transported to other states? And I wonder, have you seen an influx into your own county, into the state of Florida? And then I guess I'd follow with this. What are the feelings of the people you serve when they hear that illegal immigrants, some of which might be positive for COVID, are just flooding into your counties and into their communities? What is the feedback you're getting?
Right. It's on multiple levels. So, the first part is we don't know if there's anybody coming to our state right now. If there is, we're not aware of it. And that kind of goes back to in previous administrations when they brought people into our country that, they snuck into the border illegally and they came in, they brought them into communities and we didn't know. And actually, it was brought up by people in our own community saying, hey, I think there's a house with these people in there. And so we had to reach out to the federal government and ask them like, hey, is there a house where there's people here? And so that's how we got feedback. So sometimes there's a lack of communication to let us know. My concerns on several different levels. One is we have issues in our community, your community, every community. We have homeless kids in our own community because of, parents that are on substance abuse, mental health issues, and these kids are living on other people's couches, living in cars. We should address that first. If we can't address the issues in our own community first, and what are we doing trying to save other nations? Because we have our own kids that we have to take care of. The other issue goes back to if there are people coming in and they're sick, we've done all we could in our communities, working with our hospitals to make sure that their beds were available. If, God forbid, somebody did get a horrible case of COVID, had to go in there. The other one, too, is, with, flu season. We had I think probably the same with New York. We had a very low flu season because of that. But there have been times because of our snowbird population, our bed space is very limited. So that's something you have to look at. The other part, too, is I think there was a mental aspect where people were afraid to go to the hospital for diseases and issues that they would have regularly gone to, but they didn't because of COVID. Now they're starting to play catch up.
Yep.
And so you're seeing, and it's interesting, there's a report that came out about deaths in Florida associate that they're underreporting. Well, I think the one thing that's often forgotten is a lot of people died because we responded. Our deputies had to respond to death calls. They weren't COVID-related deaths. These are people that may have died because they had a heart disease that weren't being taken care of. They had diabetes that weren't taken care of.
Right.
These are things that aren't being looked at. But I go back to what you're saying about the illegal immigration and then bringing them in our communities. This is where the federal government needs to talk with us, work with us. We know who's here because we will get calls from the community. I mean, law enforcement always, public safety, emergency operations always start in the community, in the neighborhood. We will get the calls from people in the neighborhood saying, there's a bunch of people coming in here. We don't know who they are, why they're here. And then it's up to law enforcement to solve the problem because unfortunately society, it always comes down to law enforcement having to solve the broken problems of everybody else.
And I'll be honest, I mean, I've never been in law enforcement, never will be in law enforcement. Just I run an insurance agency. That's what I do for a living. That to me seems ridiculous that nobody would mention to you guys, hey, somebody's coming in here. We're moving these people over here. I mean, in order to get a gun in New York State, it's an 18-month process to get background checked, fingerprinted, the whole nine, right? In order to open a business, it's how long? You got to get the LLC form, then you got to get it approved by the state. I mean, there's so many hurdles to just open a business or get a firearm in New York State and around the country, but they can just bring anybody in and there's no rules or regulations on that? That just seems awfully...
little suspect.
Backwards, you know?
Well, I was going to say, I wonder if your voting laws are probably not as strong as trying to get a gun or trying to get a business in the state of New York.
No, I actually voted. They didn't even ask me for ID this year. Right. And the president didn't even ask me for a photo ID. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But that goes back to the failure in law enforcement, the failure of all public safety, emergency management. If you look at anything from the 9/11 Commission, anything else, it's always been even when they're trying to still figure out what happened in D.C. on January the 6th, it's always a failure of communication. It's a failure of people talking, and that is the problem that we deal with. On every level is look at every incident. The first, you could just doesn't even know what the incident is. I can automatically tell you after action report, there's going to say failure of communication.
Yep.
And that's what it is in this situation. And there's also usually a failure of a strategic plan, of planning things out. So, I mean, think about it. They're going to bring people in. They're going to push them real quick. They're going to move them. And then afterwards, oh, we're going to realize our mistakes. We should have done this, should have done that. Well, you know what? They've had numerous years to kind of put these plans in place. They know what they're going to do. I mean, it shouldn't be all of a sudden, we have a border crisis. We've had a border crisis for 30, 40 years. I mean, this is not something new that we're dealing with.
It's mind-boggling to me that the federal government does not go to people like you and say, what do we do? Or, hey, just so you know, this is what's happening and be ready, right? It's mind-boggling.
One other thing I'd say, too, is with COVID, too. I mean, I think it's getting insulting at this point that the emphasis on COVID in our country for the last now 13 months, right? It's been stressful. It's been, obviously there's been a lot of mental health impact. A lot of, lives have been lost. But now that the border crisis is going on, it's just no big deal all of a sudden down there, right? Bring them in, no problem. Don't get them tested. Put them in a group of 800 in the same room. I just it's very hard to comprehend for someone like us who have been essentially locked down for 13 months. Why all of a sudden now it's, oh, don't worry about it. It's okay.
They just keep changing the narrative every time there's a little bit of a light on that issue. They just seem to change the narrative, and the next day it's forgotten. Really frustrating.
No, it's very frustrating that we don't. It seems like we do this as, everybody says, oh, why do people get degrees in history? Well, it's probably one of the better degrees to get because history always repeats itself. And the fact is that we'll be dealing with a crisis, and before we can handle and properly deal with something, we're on to the next one. And if you don't finish what we're in now, it's going to just exacerbate. And then, there'll be no doubt that because we are not, everybody wants to, if we want to really take care of everything dealing with COVID, let's address the physical aspect, but the mental aspect, and then we'll go into the next issue. But we're going to go into the next issue without finishing this one. And then it's going to exacerbate, and then they'll use this again as another reason why we have to shut down or do something else. It's like, deal with one crisis at a time, and then we'll move forward.
Right. Yeah, this left seems to want to erase history. They want to cancel, right? Cancel culture.
Unless it fits the narrative, though.
Exactly.
Unless it fits what we need.
So let's move on to this, Sheriff. I'd like to let's talk about, I guess, what I'll call your previous involvement on the Homeland Security Advisory Council. You and other council members were dismissed from the council by Secretary Mayorkas, and I'll quote, in the service of an orderly transition to a new model for the HSAC. And you got even more I wanted you to read.
Yeah, I think, it's 3 paragraphs long, right? And it starts off great for all you guys. I'm honored to address you as the new secretary to express any profound gratitude my profound gratitude, for your commitment to the Department of Homeland Security. So when I first read that, I think to myself, everything's great, right? You guys, everything's good to go. 2 paragraphs later, it was just what you read. In the orderly transition, we have ended your term of service. It sounds to me a lot like thank you and see you later, all in 3
goodbye.
paragraphs. Yeah.
So I'd like to say, what was your role on the council? And secondly, why do you think you and other members of this advisory council at this ongoing national border crisis moment would be dismissed?
So, I was along with Sheriff Daniels. There's numerous people on there. People have had, different roles within Homeland Security in our government. And so, I, along with him, was, representing local law enforcement agencies, the sheriffs, there was chiefs on there, fire department. So, it's one of the things that you get the letter, and I can tell you at first, you're very disappointed because it was good to be on that committee. We were doing, actually, on the committee with Sheriff Daniels, we were looking at extremism in children to try to prevent these, our children because of social media, people doing things that can, entice them to join, radical groups and then cause harm in our nation. So, we were working on very good projects. I got the letter and I go back to that. I was disappointed because I was excited to be on this council. I was excited that, be part of Homeland Security. I said, I saw the Pentagon burn. To me, it's personal. Like with many Americans, it's personal what you went through. But I would probably take a different point than numerous members do. The new secretary, his name's on the door. The president's name's on the door. Their role and responsibility, if something happens, they're responsible for it. So if they want to create an organization to be how they want it to be and the best way, well, then that's fine, because if God forbid something happens, they're ultimately responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that kind of took me back, not because of what the secretary did, but because I think what you see nationally, especially on social media, is people are treated differently. Had this been our previous President Trump and he does stuff like this, people would have been up in arms, screaming, yelling, saying how horrible it is. This is the worst thing ever. The sky's going to fall. But then it's just under a different administration, and it's okay. And I'll say this, which may sound much different than other people. I have no problem if whoever's name's on the door wants to do what they want to do because they're ultimately responsible. But let's not be hypocritical about it.
Right.
And because one president does it, it's okay. But if another president tried to do this or did it, the sky's going to fall, and he or she is the most evil person in the world. Let's just call for what it is, and everybody can play on the same playing field. And I think that's what nationally, that's what we're seeing, is that it's not, it's about equity. It's not about equality. That's the issue we're dealing with.
Now, Sheriff, who you may not have this answer, but just to, I guess, generalize it, who takes over for you guys, though? Is it someone they appoint? Is it someone who's not even in law enforcement? I mean, who takes over there?
So the secretary gets to decide and create how he wants to create it. I actually wrote him a letter suggesting that, he divide the Homeland Security Advisory Group into two groups. One is the strategic long-term group that looks at, what are the long-term things, DNA duplication, 3D printing. That's something they did work on, which is those things that are out there a couple of years, but they're beyond the horizon, but we should start looking at them now. The other group I said should be more of the operational, boots on the ground perspective, such as the sheriffs, the police chiefs, fire rescue, hospital, utility groups, that deal with the here and now communication issues, barriers, good successes that we can emulate. So I sent him a suggestion, things that, hey, if you're going to do it, this is what you do. But I get to it. He has the prerogative, the right to create it, because when that bad day happens, they're going to ask him, what did you do? How did you have your plans in place? What happened? But what I don't like is hypocrisy, that if former President Trump or another former president, did this, would people have treated him the same or her the same as they do now with this new secretary and this new president? That's the thing I just don't. That's the one thing that I find an issue with. But it's much higher. I don't have a problem with, this new secretary wanting to define it the best way possible.
I completely agree. And I actually love that you would still reach out, even in being dismissed from this council, to still give your advice. And what you said, though, comes up to having facts and evidence and science, like you said, the boots on the ground to inform what's going on. What are the impacts of what's going on at the border on states? And unfortunately, I'm just so cynical now that they don't really want the facts and the evidence and the science to support anything. They simply want their political agenda to be followed.
No, that's what, unfortunately, especially when it comes to public safety, when it comes to, law enforcement, fire rescue, healthcare, it's not a partisan issue. This is, everybody wants to feel safe. I don't care if you're a strong Republican or a strong Democrat. You want to be safe. Nobody wants to be a victim in their home. Nobody wants to, have our children have the best education possible because our resources are being pulled. This goes back to, unfortunately, we go from one crisis to the next, one feeling to the next, and we're falling into a society that doesn't rely on facts, but relies purely on feelings.
Right.
The more we fall into a feeling society, we are just going to fail.
Agreed.
I have to go back to it. These foreign nations who are, against us, they're laughing, and they're not even thinking to themselves, do we need to do something to cripple this country? They're crippling from within, because they're not doing anything fact-based. They're not doing anything strategically. They're not looking out for the next couple of years. They're more concerned about, how many followers do they have on social media? Am I popular today or not? That's what they're focused on, not on the strategic long-term vision for our nation.
Well, I was just going to say that same thing what you just said. It's feelings, but it's also, let me just read that social media post over there, because that's got to be factual. That tweet has to be the answer. That's got to be right. And I think that's what's sad. We talked about the younger generation. Me being 28 and knowing my generation grew up with social media, right? It was the beginning of it. And the generation I help coach now, they don't know fact from social media. There's no difference. If you read something online or on social media, it's a guaranteed fact to these kids, and a lot of my generation too. And that to me is, I don't know how to say that's horrifying. That you don't do any research on your own, and it's just, hey, this guy said it on Twitter, got to be true.
Right. The other thing too, we've seen over these like last 20, 30 years, this disagreement on such fundamentally accepted things like legal immigration used to be considered like, yeah, we all would want legal immigration. Protection, right? Like you said, protection of communities and protection of our cities by law enforcement. We would all agree, but it's all become so political, things that were apolitical and generally in a standardized way agreed upon. Nobody agrees anymore. They want to put us into these compartments and get us to divide each other so that they can then conquer. It's just so frustrating. I just don't know if there's ever going to be an end to it.
Well, it goes back to a couple of things you said, which are unique. The one is, you're right. You talk about high school sports. One player, she can have an unbelievable move on the basketball court, or one football player, he can have a great play, and all of a sudden, if social media gets it, that person's the greatest player of all time. Now, they can sit the bench the whole rest of the season, but that one thing, that's the greatest player, and then, we're going to give him a scholarship because, buy into that.
Right.
The other part, too, is, the whole thing where it is about, we have to be more fact-based, and the problem is, I get it. Our phones know more about. Everybody thinks government knows everything. Our phones know more about you than government ever will. Everybody gives government too much credit sometimes. The phone, and so those phones are always set up to the fact that you're going to get the headlines that you read, and somebody with a different point of view is going to get the headlines they read, and we're going to be becoming more and more divided. And it's not even division on the facts; it's division on your opinions and your feelings, rather than on what and not being. We used to be unified on facts, but we're being separated by feelings.
And I'll say one last thing before our last question. That's why I know you probably feel the same way. Doing interviews like this and getting firsthand experience with stuff is awesome for us, because we can read all day long. We can talk about it on the radio and act like we know what we're talking about. I said this to Sheriff Daniels last week. We don't know anything that you guys go through. We had a local police officer on a couple weeks ago, and we talked to him about stuff on our podcast. We don't know what it's like out there. And to hear firsthand experience, that's better than any tweet you're ever going to read, any video you're ever going to watch. Hearing it live from somebody that's in it, to me, is the way it should be done, not just guessing what you read online, right?
And that's what people actually deserve.
I'm sorry, it's so funny you said it. So we push out a lot of our body-worn camera videos so people can actually see what happens out there. And it's ironic, when we're in situations, the worst thing that's probably ever happened to law enforcement are TV shows and movies about cops. Because they think that, we can just chop somebody's hand, just do a karate chop, and it's like, oh, cool, Jay, great actor, but please, the law enforcement, because they think every time we go out there, we shoot at people, and I can aim from 55 yards away and hit somebody like the target the size of a dime. It's like, this does not happen in the real world. And even, when the president said, well, we're just going to start shooting people in the leg if you have to. You can't in these critical situations, unless you've been there and done that, you don't understand. And that's why I say, that's why we push out those videos so people can see it. People don't call us on their best day. They call us on their worst. And we don't go to great locations all the time. We go to dilapidated homes, falling apart, cockroaches everywhere. Kids are, malnourished, never been to school. And this is a society that nobody ever talks about, but what law enforcement deals with every day. A lot of times I go back to it, and I know we're going to be talking about defunding the police probably later on, because that's a hot topic, but everybody talks about that. The reason law enforcement is the biggest form of government out there. No matter what happens, nobody knows how to deal with a problem anymore, so they call 911. If they go to McDonald's and they didn't get the supersized fries and they thought they deserved it, they call 911, and the cop shows up, and the cop's going, what am I here for? But there's nobody else but us. Every societal failure, eventually when it comes down the pipeline, because we keep trying to go upstream to figure out how do we solve problems in law enforcement, but we realize it keeps coming downstream on us, because these are societal issues that have failed. Nobody's failed to deal with them in education, healthcare, anywhere else. And it always falls on law enforcement to solve everybody's problem. And we have to do it in less than 0.1567 seconds because that's how fast Google can answer a question for you. So they expect us to be just as quick as Google.
Well, and that's, I mean, to get into the defund the police topic, I was going to say that's the most comical thing to me. You know, I can barely like run and throw a piece of garbage in the garbage can at the same time. You know, like, oh, I got to run out the door. Let me throw this over here. I'll miss it. I'll be, you know, people expect you guys to be perfect and to not look, the stress that has to be, you guys have to be under, has to be tremendous. And then not to mention the stress of a normal, you know, just pulling somebody over has got to be stressful, let alone the fact when you're chasing someone that might be armed, may not be armed, you know, and probably doesn't care to kill you guys or not. That to me is, you know, the fact that we rip you guys apart, like, you know, when I say we, not us, but that you guys, you know, perfection is needed or we got to get rid of you, to me is just very, it's very hypocritical and very unfair.
No, I mean, it's we're the only profession it feels like that no matter if somebody does something in the, you know, in Seattle, the law enforcement officers in Florida, we feel it too. No matter what they associate it. And so, you know, one of our people in our office makes this analogy to say, you know, if a brain surgeon in San Francisco messed up, you know, would they yell at every brain surgeon across the country and say, you're horrible people? This is the aspect that, unfortunately, because I think of law enforcement television shows, everybody watched Law and Order, so now they're a detective.
Yeah.
This is what I think the issue is with law enforcement. Everybody feels like they could do it, but until you go out there and you smell it, you see it, you feel it, it is a much different profession than what people think it is. This is, I mean, most of the time, I say the amount of law enforcement that ever shoot their gun in the line of duty is something less than 1%. It's something ridiculously small. We are problem solvers. We deal with crisis situation, and we're going from one crisis to the next, going all day long. That's what we deal with. And at the same time, I will say this: we don't want bad apples in law enforcement. We are the first ones to admit it. What we find out is ironic, though, now is the bad apples are now becoming, the media picks them up because the media wants controversy. The media uses the bad apples as their expert witnesses and, you know, use them and oh, this person said it. Well, that was a bad apple. That was a bad cop. You know, you wouldn't bring a bad surgeon in to say, how should we perform surgery? But now they do that in law enforcement. They bring in these quote unquote experts and they were bad law enforcement officers. It goes back to it. It seems like people that live in very safe communities with armed guards that guard the gate are the first ones to say defund the police. Go into the Section 8 projects, go into these apartment complexes where bad things are happening, where there's shootings, there's drug dealing. Ask the people in there, do you want to get rid of the police? And they're going to say, heck no. We want the cops. We appreciate the cops.
Right.
Because, yeah, you can live in an armed neighborhood with guards and everything else and fences and be safe and feel politically correct to say get rid of law enforcement. And they don't even have the solutions. Like in New York, I saw they got rid of qualified immunity and did all this. Well, they did nothing to backfill how much they're hurting law enforcement. All they do is hurt law enforcement and walk away because I think the ultimate goal is just to destroy the profession because it creates chaos. And I don't know what the end game of chaos is going to create, but all it does is causes lives and hurts people.
Right. Well, and I'd say we live in, you know, we're not in gated communities, Mike and I, but we live in communities that have low crime and whatnot. The last thing that I'd want in my community is no police, right? I mean, the last thing, or police at 25% capacity. That's the last thing I'd want. Because guess what's going to happen when that happens? Your, you know, safe neighborhood's going to become unsafe because if there's no rules and regulations, of course that's going to happen. If there's nobody around to fix problems, what are you going to do? You don't think the bad guy's going to walk in if he knows it's wide open for him?
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say, you watch these shows, criminals are not caught, tried, and convicted within an hour, folks, if you're listening. In real life, as good as Sheriff Nocco and his team is, they probably don't do that in an hour. And I think that is, you're right, the expectation now is you're going to get this done, you're going to get it done right, you're going to get it done perfectly, and that's just not real life. I mean, you're in these neighborhoods because of the crimes being committed, not because you choose to go and rough some people up or be the bullies. I mean, you're there because that's where the crimes are being committed.
No, you're right. I mean, we're dealing with human beings. Every human being is flawed. There's only one who ever walked on this earth that walked on water. And the rest of us are all flawed. Nobody's perfect. We're going to make mistakes, but unfortunately, we live in a world that, you know, it has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, if someone's not perfect, they're going to pick out every little flaw. And it's part of that cancel culture. Right. No matter what, everybody, you know, you're going to cancel everybody. Everybody's going to be canceled eventually at some point. But it goes back to the point. Go into these neighborhoods where there's a single mother with kids who she's struggling, doing 2 jobs, and ask if she wants law enforcement taken away from her community. They're going to say no. Because the other point, the more these communities are taking away law enforcement, public safety is going to go down. Businesses are not going to invest in those communities. They're going to move out to the places that do invest in law enforcement. Now you're taking neighborhoods that had higher crime rates. Businesses are moving. There's no jobs. It's not going to end well unless you just hyper tax other areas to pay for it, which is going to cause more things to collapse. So the system is not built, to have a society that there's no rules and regulations, and it's only going to fall apart. And the other part too is it's always lost on people that law enforcement officers, we enforce the law. The policymakers make the law. Mm-hmm. Policymakers should be out there on the boots, on the ground, seeing what happens, because it may sound good for a re-election to say you did something, but until you go out there and see the effects of what happened, you may be paying long-term political penalties because you didn't do it right the first time.
And I'm sure, I know this for a fact, a lot of people out there think you guys like enjoy arresting people or chasing people down, I can't imagine. I'd imagine you guys a shift where you don't have to pull anybody over, or, you guys don't have to do any detective work on a murder is probably a pretty good shift, right? You don't want to have to deal with that. But others out there think that's like number one on your list of the day. Like, let's go out and chase somebody in a police chase, or let's go arrest somebody. I'm assuming that's not what you guys love to do every day.
I'll tell you, the people who've been on this job for a while, even new people coming on, our job at the end of the day is, if everything's calm, everything's quiet, when people first get into law enforcement, because they've seen the movies, they've seen the shows, they want to get these pursuits, they want to do that, and it's exciting at first. But then you learn very quickly, like, all right, I'm arresting the same person because the criminal justice system is broken a lot of times, and you're dealing with the same person over and over and over again. The one thing, is, after you've been in for a little bit, you're just kind of like, it's a profession that you love, that you can make people smile, but at the same time, we're human beings. Yeah. I want to get home so I can get to my kid's game. Right. I don't want to be held over because there was a homicide, or I was in a shoot or something. That you want to go to your kid's game. I want to get to the supermarket in time because we're going to watch a movie. You want to live like we're human beings. We want to live our lives, and it goes back to it. We deal with the same issues over and over and over again. And we get, very disturbed when these issues aren't dealt with from the top levels, where, it all comes downhill. Yep. And always comes back to law enforcement. I'm getting evicted. Oh, and they call us up. Well, why are you getting evicted? I lost my job. Oh, you lost your job. This happened. Well, probably because the business got taxed too much. They had to shut down. The guy lost their job. And so there's all these trickle down effects that people don't see. It falls on law enforcement, but it starts if you just let capitalism work. You just let people get education. You just let people, the healthcare they need, get the healthcare they need. If you take care of those basic things, you won't need as many law enforcement because they won't get the calls to us.
Right. We're going to have to leave it right there. We back you, Sheriff. We are just tremendous advocates of the men and women in blue. Sheriff Chris Nocco, can't thank you enough. This has just been amazing for our audience, amazing for us to talk to someone like you, an expert in law enforcement, and knowing exactly the consequences of things that are going on at that border. Hopefully you could visit with us again.
Thank you all very much. God bless you, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you. Folks, to reach us for any of your wealth management insurance needs, call 833-FIN-GUYS or visit our website at thefinancialguys.com. For my co-host, Mike Speraza, this has been a great segment. I'm Mike Hayflick. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, if you're not able to watch us on the TFG Aftershow live on Facebook, go to YouTube. You can find this episode and all the previous episodes of the TFG Aftershow. Folks, have a great weekend. Please join us next week for another episode of TFG Aftershow. Welcome for a bonus segment of the TFG Aftershow. Just had a great time speaking with Stefan Mihailu and Peter Reese. And now we're joined by a colleague and friend, Ron Pierce. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mike and Mike, on the after show here. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to join in.
Probably the highlight of your career at this point.
Probably. Most
I get it.
Likely,
we get it.
Yes.
I know.
It's a big deal.
It's a
Meeting with the mics, it's definitely a
As
big deal,
Lomas
for
would
sure.
say, well, we're a pretty big deal. And that's when our wives will throw something at us when we do that.
Gotta humble you,
and,
yeah. Gotta humble
and then
you.
they leave the room and leave us alone again. Anyway, no, it's good to have you here,
Good
pal.
to be here.
And,
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
yeah, we want to specifically address how people should invest. And
Yep.
we often say, boy, it's really important to put money away, put things away or your funds away for the future so you don't have to work full time.
Absolutely.
Let's specifically talk about the kind of investing, though, people can do. Not so much the stocks, the bonds, the fixed income tools and all that, but the taxability. So traditional IRAs versus Roth IRAs. Give us a bit of a feel for how you choose.
It's discussing the vehicles. That's kind of what we say, right, when we're talking to clients, discussing the vehicles that we can use to save for, in this instance, retirement, whether it's IRAs, 401ks, whatever it might be, right? You can still invest in stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, whatever it is inside that vehicle, the same as you would in other accounts, but it's the vehicle itself, right? And a lot of people don't understand, some people do, right, the differences between the Roth and the traditional, right? The biggest difference is the tax standpoint, right? For a traditional account, when you put money into it, you get to deduct it from your taxes, right? I always say you get to go to the tax preparer and say, hey, I put $6,000 into an IRA, traditional IRA. Well, guess what? I made $6,000 less from the eyes of the IRS.
Right. So when you're getting your taxes done, folks, like a lot of us are right in the, I guess, knee deep into tax season, right? Getting your papers prepped. Maybe you've already done it. And that tax accountant will sometimes say, hey, if you do this, if you put money into your IRA, you'll have a lower tax burden. I'll save you, right? They have kind of a year-by-year view, though, don't they?
Yeah.
We, I think, as financial advisors, have a little bit of a longer-term view. How do you assess for people, should they use the traditional IRA, not from the tax accountant standpoint, but for financial advisory hat, wearing that hat? How do you assess traditional IRA versus Roth?
And the big question I ask is, in today's climate, right? There's the taxes. Everybody's talking about taxes. Big question I ask is, do you think that taxes are going to go up? Right? My opinion, yes. Right? Most of the individuals here, right? The tax code, right? The Trump era tax cuts that happened in 2017 are subject to expire in 2025. What does that mean? Individual tax rates are going up unless something has been changed or they extend it, right? So the current tax bracket, right, we got 10, we got 12, 22, 24, right? It goes up through. Right now, the 12% tax bracket is subject to go back to 15. 22, I believe it's back to 25. 24, back to 28, right? So regardless of if you personally believe that taxes are going to go up, even if they don't change the tax code, taxes are going to go up. Right? So with the Roth accounts, the benefit of that is you don't get a tax deduction when you contribute. So you're paying taxes today. Right. So you pay into taxes today. We know what our taxes are today, so that in the long term, when we go to take money out of those accounts, we're not paying anything in taxes.
And a lot of people, they misinterpret, I think, even that. So once the money's in the Roth IRA, the original contribution, but then the earnings, is it all tax-free later?
Absolutely. All tax-free. Guess what? If you die and pass the money on to your spouse, 100% tax-free as well. If you die and pass money on to beneficiaries, children, whatever, nieces, nephews, 100% tax-free as well.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems with investing, right? That a lot of people, I don't do that side of the business. I'm in this office with all you guys. I don't do that side of the business, so I don't even understand it. And that's a big thing that I think people can work with you and you can help them on, is realizing these advantages, disadvantages, what's good, what's not, why it's good, why it's not. Just listening to you guys talk about this stuff, it's enlightening to me, because I really don't. Short of knowing, I've heard in the past, throw out some money in a Roth, I'll do that here or there. But it's really good to hear the side of it, why it's important, and taxes is always going to be a thing of importance for all of us.
And not just talking. Obviously getting into the politics of it too. Not just talking about tax rates going up, right? But also, right, we have a lot of debt. Federal government has a ton of debt, right? New York State has a lot of debt. Cuomo's already said he's going to be having to raise taxes, right? And then Biden's talking about raising taxes for the wealthy, right? The quote unquote wealthy. What does that really mean, right? He's even had to kind of come back on some of the things that they've said. And historically, right now we're in low tax brackets overall as well, from the smallest tax bracket all the way up to the highest earning tax bracket.
Right.
So when you look at the writing on the wall, right, and then with all these government stimuluses, right, talking about the Green New Deals and forgiving college loans, right, all these things that they want to make and have happen. It's got to come from somewhere. They got to get the money from somewhere.
Some of the politicians, they don't realize that it comes from somewhere, or they do, and
they
it's
don't
just
care.
wrong.
They also don't care.
They don't.
It just comes from the printing shops down in DC that they can
when
just
it
print
just
it
comes,
and send it out.
When it's collectively from everyone, right? They think from everyone. They think it almost doesn't come from anyone, right? But I mean, when you're talking into the trillions of dollars of things they're talking about, right?
Well, and we just said this to our former two guests too, but the money, it's got to come from somewhere. And if you keep closing businesses and you keep, running people out, I'm using New York State because that's where we are, but you keep running people out of New York State and you keep closing businesses, you're going to run out. I mean, we're already out of money, but you're going to really run out of money really fast. Right.
Well, it's going to turn into Venezuela is what it's going to do. I mean, there just won't. Things will cost, like a loaf of bread's going to cost $322, and people are really going to suffer. And it won't just be, it won't be just the 1%ers that they're actually punishing, right? By raising taxes. Yep. They're actually going to be punishing the middle class.
Right.
I mean, and we've said it before. If they keep doing what they're doing, the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. Yep. There will literally be no middle class.
And our poor will be, what real poor is. I always say that the poor in our country is not the poor in third world countries.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Our poor still, a lot of them have cell phones.
Right.
Our poor still, a lot of them can afford to go to McDonald's for a meal. Yep. You go to some of these third world countries, you're eating things on the side of the road. Right.
Yeah. So let's bring it all back to a household. For a household, what kinds of things should they bring into an appointment with you, Ron?
Yeah, so if they anything that you want to have for a first appointment really is talking about anything with investments and financials. So anywhere from statements, Social Security statements, right? If they're getting close to retirement, benefits through work, maybe it's a 401k that they have, right? Or talking about life insurance statements, potentially tax returns, so we can kind of see, right?
Sure.
Because talking about that Roth conversation, right? Obviously, knowing what our taxes are currently is going to help us decide what would be the best choice, right? And a lot of people there that are listening right now, right, might say, well, how can I get involved in something like this, right? I was reading a CNBC article. 7 out of 10 companies, so 7 out of 10 employers have a Roth 401k option inside their plans.
Wow, I didn't realize it'd be that many.
It'd be something to just reaching out to HR person at work and saying, hey, is there a Roth option for my 401k?
Yeah, and a lot of the representatives at employer groups, even if they're third party, they don't often go into those details. No. Like the people I talk to, they say, I don't really know. I mean, they put all this paperwork in front of me. They showed me these target funds, life path funds. They said, well, since you're 32, you might want to choose that fund. That's not actually guidance, folks. So I would say, and actually, it is actually to your detriment to not know these things up front, because, I mean, we know the power of the value of a growth of money. I mean, if you can seed accounts early on in life, and get, hopefully get it like a doubling effect every, say, 10 to 12 years, that can be significant.
Be huge. Absolutely.
And you miss out on that opportunity if you don't do it right early on. Yep. You can never really catch up to what you could have potentially saved. So, folks, if you need some help on sort of navigating through all these pieces of the puzzle, what kind of investing should you do during your accumulation years? And then at the time you're ready to maybe go from working years to retirement, what do you do to harvest or distribute out of your wealth? You can come and see us, okay, folks? The Financial Guys. Find us again on thefinancialguys.com. You can call us at 833-FIN-GUYS. Ron, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Mike, thank you very much.
All right, perfect.
Always a pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed this special bonus segment of the TFG Aftershow, folks. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.